Hi there, this is Ryan Chatterson, and during this session we're going to be talking about aquaponic fish species and water quality parameters. So just a brief overview here. Any commercially aquacultured species of freshwater fish can be raised in an aquaponic system if the water quality parameters and environmental conditions are met. Okay? As we've talked about this, you've gotten a sense that if we are using a fish that doesn't fall in line with what the plant species we're planning to intend on growing requirements are, then we decouple that design, allowing us to keep both conditions needed, even if they're far away from each other, okay? So any commercially aquacultured species of freshwater fish is within our option. Not within a recirculating aquaponics system, but we can still do aquaponics with it. Ornamental or food fish, okay? So we're not just talking about food fish, we're also talking about ornamental fish for the home and pet trade. Some species will require decoupled designs in order to meet necessary living conditions. And local species are favored for their ability to live in naturally occurring local conditions. So that's always a good thing. If starting out, look at local species first, because it's going to cost you less money to recreate the environment they need, as opposed to, let's say if I wanted to grow rainbow trout down here in Florida. Well, they want low water temperatures, which even in the deep of winter, it would still be pretty hot for the trout. So doesn't fit real well in with the scheme of things around here. However, if I wanted to spend the money to chill the water and bring it down to the right temperature, I could very well raise trout here. The more money you have to spend to recreate the environment, the more money you're going to have to actually sell that product for to make money. So again, as much as we can limit these expenditures, the best. Now, if we're going to do something on a larger scale where it's completely environmentally controlled in a building, then guess what? The options open up quite a bit as long as you use thick enough insulation. It's not going to cost you that much more to keep a lower temp building for some of these species. So again, it will still cost you more money, but keep these things in mind. On a smaller scale, we definitely want to look for locally living species for those factors we just mentioned. So choose your species of fish depending on the marketability, the profitability, and the difficulty level to bring that species to market. Okay, that's really big to think about. Marketability. You can't just go out and say, I'm going to grow alligator gar and sell them to every restaurant as the new food fish. Even though they're edible, that is not going to work, okay? Marketability, alligator gar is not a highly marketable food fish. So you're going to have to put in a lot of legwork there. Like tilapia, there has been millions, probably by now billions of dollars put in marketing to gain public acceptance. It's going to be hard to do that by yourself with a new species that people aren't used to eating. So make sure it's marketable. Profitability. You don't want to grow a fish that you can't make money on. So if you're growing tilapia, but the most you can get for that fish locally is $3 a pound or $2 a pound. And when you do the math out, it may cost you close to that to actually produce it, then you're not going to want to grow that fish. Choose something that's actually going to make you money. And then last year, the difficulty level to bring that species to market. Something like tilapia is a lot easier to bring to market than a fish like a hybrid striped bass, which is, it's a little more delicate and can be a little harder to raise to fruition. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. How hard is it going to be to grow that fish? Not only do we need to choose our fish, we also need to choose how we're going to sell that fish. Okay, are we going to sell it live? Live to restaurants, something like that? Are we going to sell it filleted? Are we going to sell it gutted? Are we going to sell it live for pond stocking? Okay, that's done in large parts of the country, stock ponds for fishing activities. Are we going to sell them as fingerling sales? So sell them as juvenile fish for, could be for pond stocking, for other people growing out for fish farms, for other people growing out in aquaponics systems, or brood stock sales. So maybe you're going to raise big, healthy adults, sex them, and sell them as brood stocks, as mated pairs. There's all kinds of options in here as far as how you sell that fish. And there's also different regulations that go with these options. So selling it live is not going to have the same regulations as if you fillet a fish, which means you're going to have a food safe approved facility to actually fillet that fish. Same with gutting the fish. So there's different things that are going to have to be taken into account when you choose that. Sometimes a 2-inch goldfish will fetch as much as a 2-pound tilapia. Okay, explore all opportunities. And that's one of the big reasons that I do grow koi here at the farm. I also grow tilapia, but koi can fetch a very high price. I've sold single fish for over $100. And I know they go, I mean, in the world of koi, single fish will go for over $100,000. So it's just to show you a 2-pound tilapia, you know, just off the top of my head, it might take you a little over a year to grow a fish to that size. A 2-inch goldfish will not take you a year to get 2 inches. They will readily breed, they grow up, you know, probably a few months, maybe 3 months you could get a 2-inch goldfish. And very often, when you look at all the costs involved, you're gonna make more money in the 3 months off that 2-inch goldfish. So you have to look at how many of these, you know, what's the market? When are you going to actually reach saturation? You might only be able to sell a certain amount of goldfish, where something like tilapia, you may have a lot larger volume that you can move because more people are eating tilapia than buying goldfish. But I like to throw that in there because some people get stuck in the mindset that it has to be a food fish. And very often you're fighting for every cent when you're selling a food fish. An ornamental fish, the value is in the eye of the beholder, and you can get high dollar for fish and very often more money than you can selling food fish. So tilapia are definitely favored for their fast growth, their hardiness to adverse water conditions, and their ability to breed easily. Also, their mild taste. It's a mild tasting fish. It doesn't have a fishy taste to it, and it's widely accepted around the world. I want to say it's the 3rd most eaten fish in the world right now. So definitely a you know, a great fish and widely accepted fish. As far as favorite for the fast growth, well, a 50-gram fingerling, so we would call that an advanced fingerling. It's about this big. Tilapia can grow to 1.5 pounds within about 6 months growing period. Okay, that's how fast these fish can grow when fed properly. So one of the reasons they're highly aquacultured. They thrive in temperatures up to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, it's a warm water tropical fish. The warmer that water is, the faster the metabolism and the faster the growth rates. One of the reasons that you see a lot of people doing aquaponics, maybe in a recirculating system in their backyard, and they complain that it takes them a few years to actually grow a fish that big. Well, one of the big reasons is temperature. So most people aren't raising 85, 88 degree temperatures, water temperatures when they're raising tilapia in an aquaponics system. Probably closer to 80 or in the mid 70s if they can. Well, that's going to actually reduce the growth rate of tilapia. You're not going to meet those fast growth rates that you can get in a warmer conditions. Okay, so things like this, we have to actually investigate tilapia farming, do a little bit more research, and see what standard practices are, at what standard grow out times are, things like that, so that you can compare them to what you're planning on doing. That can help you make some decisions. Again, I'm giving you a lot of information here, but there's far, far more information out there than I can teach you in these short sessions. They will grow slower from 72 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but they'll still grow. Under 72 degrees, growth rates drop off drastically, and the feeding response also drops off. The species will succumb to cold and die around 55 degrees Fahrenheit and under. Sometimes you'll get a few more degrees under and people think they have magic tilapia. I've had tilapia that, you know, went down, it got below, I think it got to 48 degrees and they looked like they were dead on the bottom of the tank. This was years ago. 3 days later, the fish basically came back to life, was swimming around, and was just blind from that point on. So they can live through some really harsh conditions. I'm not saying you put them through those conditions, but for a target range, shoot for above 72 and definitely have your heaters set above 55. I would set them at 60. You don't want them to get near dying. You want to keep these guys healthy. If you keep them real cold throughout the winter, down there in the high 50s, even though they're living, they're much more susceptible to disease and they're not going to snap out of it and pick up their growth rates when you warm the water temperatures back up. So keep that in mind. They are omnivores, okay, so they eat plant matter and they eat bits of you know, fish and other protein. 32% protein diet is sufficient to grow a tilapia. We typically see about 1/3 of the body weight in fillets, so about 33%. If you have a 3-pound tilapia and you fillet him, you should get about 1 pound of fillet from that fish. Feed conversion ratios, roughly 1.2 pounds of feed to 1 pound of body weight, but that has a lot to do with the temperature you raise them at, with your ability to judge when the fish have had enough and you're not wasting food and throwing it in there. So some of this comes with skill level, but that's a good number to shoot for. Harvest at 1 pound for whole plated fish. So if you're in, say, the Caribbean, the islands, Asia, somewhere that values a whole plated fish, you want to harvest the tilapia about the 1 pound size, even slightly under that, 3/4 pound in some cases. If you want to fillet, you want to harvest at least 1.5 pound size fish so that you get a worthwhile fillet off of the fish, okay? And here's a beautiful picture of some of the tilapia that I had raised up at Green Sky Growers along with the team there. And you can see we have a nice packed in. This tank had 3/4 of a pound, 3/4 of a pound to 1 pound per gallon and was using pure oxygen. That's why you don't see any bubbles or anything. And these fish are stacked in, but they're all nice, healthy. You don't see any lesions on anybody. Good looking fish. So we'll move on now and we'll talk about koi. So koi are a type of carp. It's basically a colorful carp. They're favored for their hardiness, their ability to survive cold temperatures, which freezing, the water could actually freeze over solid, and as long as there's still oxygen in that water, the koi will be just fine. They have an attractive appearance, so they're really pretty fish. They look really good, they're really unique and have a lot of individual characteristics. They have a high resale value. Very unique, and they have personality. So koi will come up to you and eat out of your hand if you train them to. They have a big personality. So people become very attached and they look at this more as a pet and they're willing to pay prices that you would pay for a pet. They're fairly easy to breed. We breed them here every year, and I'll discuss that in detail as we talk about tilapia and koi spawning in a later session. They have a high fecundity, meaning they have a lot of eggs in one female. So you can get hundreds of thousands of fry from just a single spawn. And they grow quick. You can grow an extremely large koi in just a few years if you give them the space, the correct environmental conditions, and the food to do so. So koi prefer water temperatures above 60 degrees for a strong feeding response. Again, they'll live down to very low temperatures, but if you want them to eat properly, you want the water above 60 degrees. When the water gets under 55 degrees, fish will stop eating and basically hibernate, okay? If you feed during this time, it can be detrimental because you might trigger a feeding response from the fish, but they cannot digest the food. So the bacteria in their gut are not active at this time. Everything has slowed down. All the metabolism has slowed down of the bacteria, their gut, everything. And even though the fish is slowed down, seeing that food might still trigger a feeding response on his part. Just like if we have a food we have written off for years and then we see one out of the blue, you might just jump in and eat one and break your own rules. Okay? Well, if you trigger that feeding response, the food will make its way into the fish's gut and rot in its gut and can kill the fish because the bacteria and gut is just not up to par and is not ready to digest food at that time. So koi are omnivorous. They can live on 32% protein feed. That's adequate, but higher protein levels in the 40% range are commonly fed to koi. Okay, when I'm feeding koi, I like to feed my koi 42% protein feed. They do better than they do on a lower percentage protein, high omnivore feed, okay? Coloring up period is done before shows and major selling venues to bring out the best in the fish. So we feed them more expensive fish feeds. They have more carotenoids, more krill meal, and more pigment developing vitamins and ingredients that are going to make the colors on the fish pop. They're going to make them jump out, look brighter, look stronger, and that's going to make you more money when you go to sell the fish. So this is a very common practice, and you know, some home hobbyists of course feed the high color food throughout the year because they can afford it and this is just a pet for them. But if you're growing these commercially, it's a lot of money for the high color ingredients in those feeds. So you only do a coloring up period before you go to show them. And here's a picture of some beautiful koi in some pretty crystal clear water. You can see we had just loaded these in a system there. And you can see you know, wide variety of colors there. And they really are beautiful fish. And here's a poster from Blackwater Creek Koi Farms, who I've mentioned you know, 1 or 2 times throughout this course. And you can see the variety of koi that they provide. And all of these have a different name, a different Japanese name. They are a different subtype. Sometimes the fins are different, the markings are different, but these are actually all different specific types of koi. And as you can see, they're beautiful and they go for a lot of money. So this may be something that's right for your operation. The big point is, can you sell the fish? If you're in somewhere that doesn't have any water gardens, doesn't have any ponds, you probably don't want to grow koi because you need people that are going to buy these things from you. Catfish, we'll go ahead and move on here. They're favored for taste, for fast growth rates, and for hardiness. So some people love the taste of catfish. That's just something they grew up on or their taste buds really enjoy, but it's a you know, specific thing that people like that taste of catfish. It has a specific taste. Fingerlings are cheap to buy and not difficult to produce on site. Unlike tilapia and unlike tilapia, who can actually reproduce at a very young age, catfish take a few years of age and they have to get a little bit bigger and more mature to be able to reproduce. But once they have the size and the maturity, it's a very easy process. They spend most of their time on the bottom of the tank and in the bottom of a lake in a natural process. And this should be taken into consideration during the design phase. So again, I've seen aquacultured catfish that completely fill out the water column, but if you have a choice between a wider tank and a more narrow, taller tank, you want to opt for that wider tank in this circumstance. The more we can spread them out and have them less stacked up on top of each other, the less they're going to be rubbing on each other, which is a common way that they can spread tissue disease, things like that. So we're going to keep them nice and spread out throughout the water column. And if we stick to those tank dimensions that I gave you before, you'll be right in the perfect dimensions for those tanks. We can, like I mentioned here, okay, can develop skin lesions fairly easily. And when they do well when treated with salt. So if they do develop skin lesions, that's a common treatment, is to add salt to the water. Rising the salinity to about 3 parts per thousand will increase the slime coat on the fish and help it to ward off any infection. The problem is we don't want to do that and have that salt go into our plant portion of the aquaponics system, because the salt is a no-no with the plants. It can fry several varieties. You have to look at the salinity tolerances of the variety of plants you're growing, but for the most part, that's a no-go. So what we would like to do is, if this happens, you'd like to either quarantine that tank, valve that off, keep it separate, maybe do small water exchanges in there, and add salt so that you can cure those fish, then bring it back online and dilute the salt out of the water. Dilute the salt out of the water, then bring it back online and have everything back in operation. And here's a picture of a nice, I believe that's a channel catfish here. So hybrid striped bass is the next species that we'll talk about. And again, we're talking about warm water species right now, or what I would consider warm water, and we're going to shift over to cold water species here in a little bit. Now, a hybrid striped bass is actually a cross between a striped bass and a white bass. Okay, they hybridize these two, and it produces a mostly sterile population, though when these are stocked into lakes, there are a few that come out and they are not sterile. So it's not perfect, but for the most part, these guys are going to be sterile. They're favored for high selling price, great taste, aggressive feeding, ability to stock in high densities. And they're one of these fish that is almost constantly swimming in a tank. When we grew these on the rooftop facility at Green Sky Growers, it was really nice to watch them because the entire school just constantly swam in a circle opposing the current. And whenever we fed, there would be, an extremely exciting feeding response. They'd thrash around, tear up the food, and then go right back into their circular motion. They prefer temperatures in what I would call the medium range of 65 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and thrive in the Goldilocks zone of 72 degrees. So that's right where our plants like it, the 72 degree mark. Well, these guys do great at 72 degrees. So it's really a good fish in a coupled aquaponics system, or even decoupled, because you don't have to do much temperature change between the two. They do require a little bit better water quality than, say, a tilapia. They can come down with gill problems if there's too much suspended solids in the water. So you still may opt for a decoupled aquaponics system, but it's a great fish. It's less forgiving in adverse water conditions or low oxygen events. So if oxygen goes out and you have tilapia, you have koi, you have hybrid striped bass, the striped bass are going to die first, then your koi, then your tilapia. They just are much more susceptible to low oxygen events. So make sure that you have your backups in place, and even if you do have a low oxygen event or a power outage or something, it won't end in a low oxygen event because you'll have your backups there. Fingerlings are commonly bought at 1 year old and stocked for grow out from there. So most of the fingerlings in the US are pond grown. They stock the fry in the ponds. Throughout the year, those fry grow up into juveniles and into fingerlings. After a year, they're actually harvested from the pond, brought out. They're usually somewhat sterilized. I've got them in where they've had gill flukes and some problems that we've had to get rid of. But then they take them from there and stock them into recirculating aquaculture systems or other ponds for grow out. Okay, so here's a picture of a nice hybrid striped bass, and it's really distinct by this broken lateral line. Okay, you see the lateral lines going across here? You can see it's broken here. It's not a straight line going across the body. A striped bass has a straight line. The hybrid striped bass is notorious for those lines being broken. But this is, you see, it's a nice fat fish. That's a healthy fish and really good looking. Here's another one when we pulled him out. This was basically ready to harvest. Good looking fish. And I've got him up against a ruler there just so we could do a size comparison. You see the white background. If you ever want to take good pictures of your fish or of your produce, Again, I use a white piece of either acrylic or ABS plastic and then set them on that. It gives you a nice crisp background. It's still hard and you can take some beautiful pictures on it. I had to blow this up a little bit so it didn't come out quite as crisp, but you get the idea. Okay, we're going to move on now to barramundi. All right. This is also known as freshwater snook or an Asian sea bass. Those are also names that are commonly used to describe this fish. And it's a native to Australia. These are very commonly raised in Australia. There's large barramundi farms. A lot of people that do aquaponics in Australia use barramundi, among other fish. And it's a very popular and a very good tasting fillet. Optimum water temperatures for the barramundi are going to be 26 to 30 degrees Celsius. So that's a warm water fish. And it grows to market size, about 500 grams, within a year. Now, we raise these in freshwater. To breed these, it's a little more difficult. You have to actually, there's some salt water gets involved in that, and I'm not going to cover that process. But these are basically have just recently become more available in the USA to stock and to purchase and to grow out. Now, in most cases, again, coming from Australia, you're going to need an invasive species permit, which in most of those cases means you got to grow this stuff in a building and have a course of action in case of tragedies, things like that. You don't want to build your farm next to a warm water river that leads out to the ocean or something like that, because they're going to deny you a permit. So if you're going to choose this, talk to your permitting agency in the beginning before you actually are buying the property, doing everything you have to do to set this up, to make sure you're all on the same track. And they're going to probably be behind you. If you follow the letter of the law, they're going to be excited to see this get up and going. So talk to your local authorities and get the rundown before investing money. It's a very unique fish that may set you apart in the marketplace. Again, how many times have you gone to the grocery store or to a restaurant and seen barramundi? Well, in high class, New York, San Francisco, high populated areas, yeah, you may see those coming in. Most of the rest of the country, you're not ever going to have seen this fish. It grows quickly and can be grown at high densities. Talked about invasive species permits required. Highly prized and bought live in the Asian marketplace. Okay, like tilapia, in the Asian marketplace, they prefer to buy these fish live. Now, with any invasive species, that creates a big issue because you can't sell an invasive species live unless the person buying it from you has an invasive species permit as well. And a restaurant's not going to have that. So that creates a big problem in the US with selling into the live marketplace. With tilapia, less so because they're not considered invasive everywhere. But that's something to keep in mind. Even though everybody likes them live, it might not be legal to do that. So do your research on that portion. Expect to see more of this species being cultured in the US. There's a facility, I want to say it's in Iowa right now, that are raising 1 million pounds a year of barramundi, and they're growing their facility to expand to raise 7 million pounds a year with a hatchery expansion, grow out expansion, etc., etc. So barramundi's looks like it's taken a foothold as long as these guys can keep it going. And there's another company up in the northeastern part of the U.S. that's been growing barramundi for years, but doesn't actually supply fingerlings. So right now, a lot of fingerlings have to be flown in from Australia while they're young, and that can be a little bit more expensive. But this is a unique fish, and if you're looking to set yourself apart, this is something to look into. And here's a beautiful picture of two large barramundi there. They can grow, I don't know the size off the top of my head, but huge fish. I mean, I've seen people holding 4-foot-long fish, 1.2 meter long fish, huge fish. So not that you would grow them that big in a system, but you could. Okay, let's talk about another fish. Sturgeon, that we don't commonly talk about maybe in the aquaponics crowd. They are on the low end of that warm water temperature scale, I'd say. It's definitely a risky and a long-term crop of 3 to 8 years, okay? 3 years to get them big enough to harvest for meat or for fillets, and it could be even longer, up to the 8-year mark, if you're going to raise them for caviar, which is a very common reason that you're going to raise sturgeon. Now, this is definitely more of a niche market. You need to do your research. If you don't like caviar, you might not want to raise sturgeon. You know, this is something you're going to need to love your product, sell your product, get out there and put it out there and compete with people in a a different world. You can imagine the caviar world. This is high class. This is something that is going to take some infiltrating, okay? But it's doable, and I actually have an interest in doing this myself later on down the road. I have a big interest, and I'll keep you guys updated if I go down that road. This requires research, like I mentioned, well-developed business plan, and market penetration strategies, much more so than other species. And I would consider this high-stakes poker, okay? 8 years without having a catastrophe on a huge operation, growing huge fish, where if they die, you're going to lose that investment. This is risky business, okay? With risky business can come great rewards. The prices that are achieved from growing out maybe a 7-year sturgeon are extremely high. That is highly prized caviar, and American caviar is growing on the world stage. So it could definitely be a marketable business and a doable business, but it needs more research than something like tilapia or some of these other methods. And here is a beautiful picture of a sturgeon. Okay, and again, these are big creatures. You're going to be growing these in, 20-foot diameter tanks, something like that. Big tanks. They're big fish. Okay, and here's a facility in North Carolina, here in the United States, that grows caviar and that grows sturgeon, several varieties of sturgeon, and then they offer caviar and also meat products from that sturgeon. And you can see this guy's really happy. He's got a hold of a big old sturgeon, loving life in the caviar world. So this is exciting stuff here, and just something to bring to your attention that there's options out there. If you've seen it, it may be an option. It's just you've got to see if you can develop it into a profitable business. We'll move on here to bait fish. Okay, this is something else to consider that many people don't even blink an eye at. It's all food fish, food fish, food fish. But bait fish can be very profitable. Specifically in the U.S. here, fathead minnows and shiners. Okay, here's your scientific names for them. High fecundity and easy to breed, both those species. Shiners are a carp. They breed very similar to koi. And the minnows breed almost constantly. They're very easy to breed as well. The viability depends on your proximity to sport fishing industry and competition. If there's anybody else out there that's actually growing bait. Here in Florida, I've researched this a bit, and out of 8 different shops selling bait, only one of them actually purchased from in Florida. The rest of them shipped in their bait from Arkansas, which is a good bit away. It's across the country, where they do large flat ponds of minnows, shiners, and other fish. Okay, so even in Florida, sport fishing capital of the U.S. and maybe of the world, we have a ton of tourism here, multiple millions, maybe even billions of dollars in sports fishing industry, and we're bringing our bait in from other states. So this is something that could be penetrated for sure. Don't rule it out. Many people make their livings raising and selling bait. It's just another fish, okay? And you're going to skirt your food fish rules. You're not going to have to process any of that stuff, because you're not selling it for human consumption. Okay, and here's a picture of your flathead minnow, common flathead minnow, used for largemouth bass fishing, smallmouth bass fishing, crappie fishing, etc. And then we've got your golden shiner, which is also very common in the sports fishing industry for largemouth bass and other sport fish. And that's it for this session. Again, if you have any questions at all, please email me, ryan@collegeofaquaponics.com, and I will be sure to cover those questions in our weekly question and answer session, and make sure you get all the information that you need. Thank you very much.